Hi, this is Greg at Track 25. Welcome to our series on pushing the limits of Pro Tools Intro and Live Lite, and particularly showing you how to get 1,000 plus channels from each of these apps. You're probably aware of the restrictions on these free versions, but let's check some specifics. Notice Pro Tools does allow the creation of more types of strips, but basically both suggest a max of 8 playback tracks, and worse, a hard limit of 4 recording inputs. At the end of this video, there's a little demo to address that awkward 4-input limit. Here's our working parameters. To make my life easier, we'll represent the 1,000 channels by using 512 stereo audio files. CPU workload will become a factor quickly, so we'll keep an eye on our system monitor. But since this series is all about free apps and smaller setups, we'll have this one. I got this iMac secondhand. It began its life with Snow Leopard in 2011 and ended official support with High Sierra in 2017. But both Live and Pro Tools require a much more current OS. Thanks to the team at OpenCore, we'll be running Ventura. The internal hard drive would be a problem for 1,000 channels, so now there's a Thunderbolt enclosure and 3 SSDs to distribute the load. There's no USB 3 support, but this Audio Engine D1 will work fine. We're presenting this series in 6 parts, since we're running both Live Lite and Pro Tools Intro, and some folks may prefer to skip around. Parts 2 and 3 will focus on getting the most out of these apps just using their plain vanilla built-in capabilities. We'll easily get beyond 8 tracks, but we won't hit that 4-digit finish line. Parts 4 and 5 will take each app to the 1,000 mark using some helper plugins, but still keeping the budget approach in mind. In Part 6, we have some more realistic session examples of using our new larger channel counts, and also some tips and suggestions for plugins for the budget-minded. Before we start pushing those boundaries, let's take a look at how we can get more from these apps without using any special tricks. First, if you only have one of these, you really should add the other one. Pro Tools and Live are very different beasts, but can definitely complement each other. Plus, it's always good to have more tools in your toolbox. Second, we can easily combine them and receive the benefits of both. We'll do a demo of that. Third, we can take advantage of the fact that Ableton allows you 2 authorizations for Live Lite, and Avid allows 5 activations for Pro Tools Intro. Yeah, this seems overkill. But we will revisit this chart once we're past the 4-digit goal and see some truly bizarre numbers. The single system method for combining our apps is easier to drive and also cheaper. So let's see how that works. We need to introduce our first helper app, Loopback from Rogue Amoeba. Loopback is a powerful audio utility, but we're just going to set up this simple 4-channel interface and quit Loopback. Now we'll use the Audio Devices window in Audio MIDI Setup to modify our Pro Tools Aggregate I/O virtual interface, like this. While we're here, we'll also open the MIDI Devices window and make sure the IAC driver is online. Now we're done with Audio MIDI Setup. Now let's create some sessions and set up audio paths in both apps. In Live's audio prefs, we can leave the input empty and choose Loop 4 as our new output interface. Let's make sure the master is sending to 1 and 2. In the Pro Tools Setup menu, we select Pro Tools Aggregate as our new playback engine, and then create an aux track with 1 and 2 as the input. If we play a file from Live, we can see that it's arriving at our aux input. Now let's set up our sync. In Live's MIDI prefs, we'll enable sync for the IAC driver, choose MIDI timecode, and notice the offset. -2 frames works here, but all setups are different and you'll need to check. In the peripherals section of Pro Tools, we need to choose the IAC driver as our MIDI timecode generator source, and then make sure the Transport MTC button is on. If we enable EXT, then Live will follow along. This will allow playing both systems together, but we need to be sure we have the right sync relationship. I've added an audio track in Pro Tools with the same audio file. We can see them here side by side. If we pan them opposite, we can evaluate any time difference. Using the offset area in Live, you can find the nearest match. In Pro Tools, you can fine-tune with the Time Adjuster plugin if you need tighter sync. To work on the apps without the locked timeline, just deselect the MTC in Pro Tools or EXT in Live. Let's get back to that awkward 4-input recording limitation that both our apps share. Knowing the target audience for both Live Lite and Pro Tools Intro, this is somewhat disappointing. Before we wrap part 1, let's solve this recording limitation with an extra Mac and introduce 3 more helpers in the process. Our first helper is MainStage. I've built a simple MainStage setup to receive our 16 mics from our live streaming area and send them to our recorder over the LAN. We'll set them up in stereo pairs, but you can separate these as needed after you record. If you need any cue mixes or headphone feeds, you'll want to set them up in MainStage, as this will not be a zero latency path to Live or Pro Tools. You can do lots more with MainStage, but we'll stick to just sending mics for this setup. Our next helper is Connector from Blue Cat Audio. We'll simply add a connector plug into each pair, enable send, enter the IP address and matching ports of our recorder. You probably can use the local host option, but here we're using the broader network option as we have separate subnets. We're finished with MainStage now, so let's configure Pro Tools. We can't select a plugin as an audio source, so we'll create 8 instruments tracks to receive the mics. Each of these will get an instance of FreeCeiver, the free sibling to Blue Cat Connector. Make sure the port numbers match those on MainStage, and you'll see audio coming in. Once we have signal on our instrument tracks, we can create 8 stereo audio tracks and route the output of our instrument tracks directly to the new audio tracks. We'll enable the audio tracks, and now we can see all 16 signals arriving. Now let's set up something similar in Live. Since we want to use all 8 of our permitted strips to record stereo audio, we need to receive the network streams from both our available return tracks. Since one FreeCeiver on each return track won't get us to 16, we'll introduce another helper, Blue Cat Patchwork. Patchwork is a tremendously deep plugin that could have its own video series, but we're going to do something pretty basic here. With an instance of Patchwork receiving 4 pairs of audio on each return track, we get our streams and 16 channels. Patchwork exists in AAX, AU, VST, and VST3 formats, and all workstations handle these formats differently. For our purpose, we need the VST versions of Patchwork and FreeCeiver on our return tracks to see the multi-outs as sources for our audio tracks. With a new live set, delete the MIDI tracks, add audio tracks, naming them Rec 1 through 8. On the return tracks, delete the reverb and delay effect, then name the returns Set 1 and Set 2. We'll use these as inputs to the audio tracks, but at the moment, they only do stereo. Let's add Patchwork to both return tracks. For each instance of Patchwork, we'll add 4 instances of FreeCeiver, making sure to assign the same ports as our MainStage system. With our instances set up, we need to set the routing in Patchwork to get all 8 channels. Now we can modify the input for the audio tracks to reflect the multi-channel Patchwork setup and change the tracks from auto to in. Now we can look at Patchwork on Set 1 and see the incoming audio. Be sure to leave the plugin GUI open. Check Set 2 for incoming audio also, and be sure to leave the plugin GUI open. Now we can enable all our audio channels and record. That brings us to the end of Part 1. This is Greg from Track 25. See you next time.